Hello, this is Heather Gates, and I welcome you to the Stand in the And podcast, where we have honest conversations about the messy complexity of the human experience, where we get stuck, and how we find forward in the and of it all where many things are true at once. This podcast is designed especially for those of us who want to make things more beautiful and better for everyone, and sometimes need reminding that we are human too. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back to the Stand in the And podcast, y'all. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and so grateful that y'all could be here to join me for it. We're joined today by my colleague and mentor in creativity, Erin Halligan-Clare. Erin, thank you so much for being here today for conversation and storytelling.
My pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for months, I feel like.
Right. Since we met each other, I'm quite sure for the first time, and we'll tell that story in a second. Before we do that, I'd love to just invite you to introduce yourself to folks in a way that feels meaningful to you.
Sure. So my name is Erin, and I'm based in Asheville, North Carolina. I am the founder of a narrative art space here in Asheville called Story Parlor, which really is centered in looking at how narrative and story connects us in our creativity, in our community. And so we offer classes and events that celebrate storytelling through all mediums, but then also kind of the story that we bring as creatives and as community members that contributes to that rich conversation. I also have recently launched two other business ventures. One is the Inward and Artward School of Creativity, which is built on a belief that if we want to make meaningful things in the world, whether that's art or organizations or change, we have to cultivate a relationship with our inner life. And then also, as of the fall, my partner and I took over ownership of the Battery Park Book Exchange and Champagne Bar, which is this darling little bookshop in the Grove Arcade in downtown Asheville. And so that's been a fun little venture to have and has kept us busy. But I think in general, the work that I do in the community and personally as a creative person and as a mother is really kind of sitting at this intersection of where creativity and personal mythology, facilitation kind of all come together to help people move from imagination into something real.
I love that period on that statement, right? Moving from imagination to something real. I've not ever used that language, but I think I would use a similar language to describe what I do, which is a very different actual day job. But I share with you this working with cultivating that in others, right? The courage and the process from imagining to making real. You said in your introduction, even in Inward and Art, we're talking about whether you're making art or organization or some other kind of change. So I want us to dig in. I can't wait. That's why I know this conversation is going to be so juicy because I think we're coming at it from such different places. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just really curious what the intersection points are around that. I think I do want to talk about our our crossing paths around the and originally. But before we do that, let me start us with our and stand to honor how we're coming at this today. I don't know if you've listened to the podcast before, but our and stand is this kind of, how are we? I think in your work, you do introduction that's like one feeling word. So I just invite two in service to. Sometimes it's more than one thing, and it doesn't have to be a feeling word. It's more an honoring, I think, of you in a human-centered way about how you're showing up today to space. So if you have an and that you're standing in today that you want to share, or I'm happy to go first.
Ooh, I'm like I have two floating around in my mind. Um, I guess I'll go with anchoring and expanding.
You want to say more about that?
Sure.
Okay.
I think just because I feel like I'm in a real season of building.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And yeah, and I think that that always asks us to find that centeredness, to find that anchoring so that we can have that courage and that willingness to step out into the unknown, which requires so much expansion, so much vulnerability. So I feel like that little anchoring point is what allows you to kind of hold on and do that work. Which is funny because the other kind of dynamic that I was fiddling around with was this idea of freedom and constraint, and I think there's a parallel there
Mm.
in how they're related, but all comes back to this similar thing of how we create, how we come back to ourselves and continue that loop.
They both resonate with me and in my felt sense are directional, right? This sort of kind of a rooting and an expand, right? I'm imagining even, as you describe it, as a tree with, like, roots,
Ooh, I love that. Yeah.
and then the branches and the leaves and the beyond, and I certainly, um, gosh, as a business owner, a mom, all of it, find myself in that dance, so I love the reminder of the both and of those,
Mhm.
um, the anchoring to expand. I follow Yoga with Adriene, I think it's her who talks about root to rise.
I
Is
did
that I
my
don't know if that's a yoga word or not, but, like, this notion of root to
I've heard
rise.
her say that. I did one of my yoga trainings through the school that she owns in Austin, so I'm
No
a big
kidding.
fan.
I didn't know that
Yeah.
was a thing. I just have followed her for, like, 10 years on free YouTube videos.
Yeah, yeah.
That's amazing.
But
Okay,
Root to Rise, yeah, I love that.
so maybe I'm gonna lean into some of that wisdom for mine. I found myself in particular kind of coming out of the past couple days in the and of fear and trust. Um, I think in particular in the context of what feels like a transition time. I think you know this. Everybody on the podcast is tired of hearing me talk about it. But I have a kiddo graduating from high school, and now we know where he's going to college, and we're starting to imagine that. I have some decisions to make in the business of this, kind of at some decision point, at some uncertainty point, and was really feeling mostly kind of the fear rising. And through some, 'cause I have pretty intimate relationship with fear. So in the turning toward, I guess the and of this is newly emerging to me that trust is also there. And so kind of playing with the tension of holding both fear as a teacher, as an indicator, as a what's real and what's not, and then trust and what does trust mean to me right now? Trust in me, trust in community. Um, yeah, it's an
There's
anti time.
Yeah, there's so much there. There's so much
Mhm.
there. I recently went down a rabbit hole with the concept of fear and the word fear and trying to figure out kind of its etymological roots.
I lo
And
Your
it's
nerdery about creativity is so beautiful to me. I've never met anybody, truly, that is like a scientist of creativity in a way
Oh
that
my
you
gosh.
know about
You are the
creativity.
first person to use the word science with something related to me, and I love it.
I don't know what else to call it, but your depth of knowledge and intentionality around it is fascinating to me. So, carry on. Um,
Well, so, okay, a couple things. The
okay,
first is that when you go way back, there are some lineages with the word fear that are rooted in the word fair, as like a thoroughfare, as something that you have to go through, a passage.
have
And
chills.
so, the you saying that trust is on the other side of that feels so intrinsically linked to me because I think if you then start to bring forth this idea of a thoroughfare or a fairway or a passage into what fear has come to mean for us today, that's the only way through. Because you are I think fear in particular, if you're gonna link it to, like, neurologically what's happening, is rooted to something that's unknown. And so we have all of these things, in our brain that are saying, like, "Alert, alert, abort, abort," because we don't have a concept of how to protect ourselves in the passageway. And, from a creativity standpoint, it makes so much sense because to imagine something or to have an idea for something and then to actualize it are two very, very different things. and it requires the trust and the courage to embark upon a thoroughfare into the unknown. You don't know how it's gonna materialize, you don't know how it's gonna actualize, you don't know how you as a creative person are going to be changed, challenged, impacted in the process, and all of that is in opposition to the status quo, which is a standing still, which is in opposition to a thoroughfare, to a passage. So I find that just so beautiful that those 2 things are coexisting for you right now, and what could, be nurtured in that relationship as, like, a dynamic. It's really cool.
It is cool, and I just love the image now I'm sitting with of a passageway. I think about, Brené Brown's work, and she uses the quote, or the story around the arena and talks about the arena and being in the arena, and it is my experience that when I'm in the, quote, "arena" is not the scary part, because then you're in it, and that's to me, it's flow, it's presence. It's that tunnel. I'm not an athlete, but I imagine, like, when you're headed to the arena, you're going through this dark tunnel, and then there's the door. So to me, the tunnel is where the scary part is,
Yeah.
because then you're in, and it's less whatever is gonna happen is happening. So it's that unknown and that anticipation. But just fear as a passageway sounds love lovelier, I think, than we use lovelier, as I say to the writer. I'm gonna give you a lot of content, today. Yeah, it just is nice, and I certainly, um yeah, it's my experience that it is always part, and I think in your model, you talk about fear explicitly
Mhm. Yeah.
in the work that you teach. So maybe let's get right in it. I think let me just tee up for for context that I think you and I crossed paths initially, because I had heard about Story Parlor and had recently had my kind of creativity. I'll use quotes because I think I had a certain idea of what that word means until I have met you, and now I think of it differently. But I had my creativity, I will say reignited, and it had me on an exploration for where to cultivate that.
Mhm.
And I don't remember the event, but you all were having a special event of some sort. It was like a couple of
Uh,
days, but I
yeah,
could only
our
go to a p
parlor fest, I
Okay,
think.
so you were having
Yeah.
Parlor Fest, again, which I'd never heard of. I'd never been to Story Parlor, didn't know you at the time, but you had a session. I signed up for the whole day, but you had a session on messy middle. And I thought, that is my space. As you know now, I'm obsessed with the and the mess in the middle. I'll say to you, I was very nervous as a facilitator and a space holder. I'm a very awkward participant.
Mm.
I think there's a reason why I usually am the space holder. It gives me different agency. There is such a vulnerability to being in the chair. And what an amazing place you have created. As you know, shout out to all of my buddies in the, Creative Pal Clubhouse.
Huh? We
Um,
miss you.
I t it it really is remarkable, the sense of it makes me tender, like, the belonging that you have created there.
Mm. It's a co-created thing. I think just like this idea of the inward and artward model of, none of this exists in a vacuum. All of it is collaborative, accumulative, in relationship, this dynamic of this withness that if we allow for it, I think gives us this sense of belonging not just to ourselves, but then to each other. And like what that opens up for us in the realm of possibility is pretty profound.
And it is that deep belief that keeps me doing what I do too, right? The power of, uh, connection,
Mhm.
and what can not only what can be born from that space, but just what I don't know if it's what it reminds us that we already are. It's what is created, the alchemy of it. So yeah, I was there, I guess, just for that one session, and I introduced myself to you and probably immediately said, "Hi, I'm gonna invent a podcast about the and I think you should be on it." And you're like, "Okay."
I do think it was within, like, 5 minutes that we made this plan, and here we are, like, some almost a year later, I feel like. And look
And
at that, isn't that incredible?
and I feel like in that moment, Aaron, you maybe took me over to a flyer or something and said you pointed the "and" out to me, and
Mhm,
maybe it was in Inward and Artward. So tell me more about, you know, clearly I like to talk about the and you are somebody I've encountered that really sees that too. I mean, it's integrated in the title of your work, but maybe let's just start if there's something you wanna say generally about the and in creativity, but let's maybe dive in a little bit more, when you use the language of inward and outward.
mhm.
What what and are we talking about there?
So I think it's multi-layered.
Okay.
Um, and it goes a little bit back to kind of the inciting incident with Story Parlor and how that came to be in noticing, this inner narrative that kind of existed in the bloodstream of everything that I saw creatives doing. And it's just like, I think it's the Irish philosopher John Donahue who coined this term, the reverence of approach. Once you start to notice something and you approach great things, they'll start to approach you, and you have this thing that you constantly notice. And all of a sudden, I couldn't unsee this idea of story. Anywhere that I went, it was in everything. Meaning that, it's not just, I'm a writer. It's not just the memoir or the poem that's telling a story, or for a painter, the painting, or for a musician, the song. It's their life experience, their life story, which again is so integrated, not just in their individual lived experience, but within this collective, be it conscious or unconscious or subconscious, in how that has led them to not just the reason I'm a writer and not a photographer, but the key inquiries that I'm constantly exploring in my work, which are things that feel like they're outside of even my like jurisdiction. Like I am drawn to them. And so that is something that I am trying to reconcile when I put pen to page. And that's something that I've seen be reminiscent in creatives of all types or entrepreneurs of all types, like this call to do something and to search and find meaning and purpose and understand it in a more nuanced way. Um, and then it went down another layer. And that was in this journey of actualizing a creative piece. I am excruciatingly dealing with my own stories at every turn, for better or worse. Meaning, when I go to put pen to page and I see just, a white screen and a cursor blinking at me, I have these immediate reactions that come up that are often rooted in some sort of fear because I'm facing the literal unknown of what's going to happen. And a lot of what then occurs is rooted in story, otherwise known as habit. These habits are stories that we perpetuate and we tell ourselves over and over again, and then integrate into our mythology. And what I mean by this word, mythology, which I look at from a personal lens, is just this constellation of our beliefs and our ideologies and things that have happened to us that ultimately come to shape our worldview. And so, that includes these ways of being that can become rote or can kind of exist on autopilot, which a lot of these habitual ways of being are. And so, you look at a lot of creative blocks that people, or blocks in general, scrap the word creative, perfectionism, self doubt, self sabotage, the harsh inner critic, whatever it might be. These are all rooted in a narrative that we are saying to ourselves and then accepting as the story of truth. And I think what I love about putting the word story on top of this is that when you kind of strip down what story looks like in a narrative sense, at the core of it, at all times, is change, is learning something. And so if we can apply that ideology to how we work with our own stories that are helping us move through the world or hindering our movement through the world, then that gives us a sense of autonomy, that gives us a sense of self efficacy, that we can change, that we can learn from it. And those two things are possible for us in the journey. And so, reshifting these narratives about what these things are that are maybe getting in the way of these things that are calling to us, and looking at it through the lens of story is this kind of trilateral approach to what the inward and artward model strives to emulate, which, again, at its core is in order for us to go artward, in order for us to have a creative experience, whether that's artistic or otherwise, we
Mhm.
need to go in and examine these stories, examine these myths, examine these narratives so that we're bringing a sense of intentionality to them and attentionality to them, so that we can reclaim the way that we move through the choices in in a way that we have some ownership over them and not the other way around. And so that's one layer of the inward and outward model. I think if you were to, and again, I frame that kind of in a trilateral relationship. I think you could even add a fourth to that, which is when I do share my writing with others or when I am the recipient of other people's creative work, again, whether that's artistic or whether that's someone starting a podcast or a business or, engaging in a relationship or whatever it might be, I am changed. I learned something through that dynamic. And so I think there's this constant undulating wave that's coming back and forth between us in the self and us as we exist and coexist amongst each other. So that kind of wave, I think, is where the second part of the inward and artward exists, which from a facilitator lens, which is what the training is called, where we, got to spend time together, this creative facilitator training. It models this idea of praxis through the educational sense. And this is something that I've studied extensively through specifically the teachings of Bell Hooks, Paulo Freire, more contemporarily, Felicia Rose Chavez, in looking at the way we learn as individuals. And there's obviously a lot of issues with education as a pillar and as an institution in our society. And, that can be traced back historically and kind of we can point the finger at a lot of things. But when you look at the brain science of how it is that we actually integrate what it is that's coming to us, there's taking something in, reflecting on it, this introspection, or what I call the inward. And then there's the application of it. So in praxis, they call it the application of theory. In creative work, it's putting our hands on the paper. It's writing the haiku and taking a stab at it. It's iteration. It's experimentation. It's conversation with others about what we're learning. And then we take that back. So if you almost look at this idea of the infinity sign,
Yeah, I
we
was
take
just
back
thinking about that. Mhm.
everything that we learn and then reintegrate that, right? Then we're introspecting on everything that we had applied, and then we apply that again, and it's just endless. And so, to answer your question in this long, circuitous way, the and in inward and outward holds all of that, but also it recognizes that we are humans. And to quote Alexander Pope, to err is to human. And the ampersand in its symbology is like looking at the one behind you now, the
Yeah.
one that looks like the infinity sign. It is a broken infinity sign.
I forgot that you told me this, and my mind was blown. Okay, go ahead.
So it allows us to have, that ability to then pause. It has that ability to be seasonal and have the seasonality in our lives, in our projects, in our processes, in our creativity, in our integration, as creatives, as human beings, as people in relationship to ourselves and to others. And so I love it as a symbol, kind of like this Zen approach to how we hold these two things together. Um, And yeah, I think I think that's where you and I really started to, like,
That
geek
light
out, to, like, go back to the little meet cute that we had at the
Hey,
parlor sex.
I like
Yeah.
and this is why we're here because,
Uh-huh.
not everybody wants to ponder such things, and when we find each other,
Uh-huh.
we attach. Uh, I there's so much in what you just said, trails I think I wanna just kind of use that description as an anchor point to jump off. The first point for me is story and your use of the word story, right? I think, first, for most of us, when we think of story, we're like, I'm reading a book or I'm telling a story of what just happened yesterday. But thinking about story as the stories I'm telling myself as such a helpful reminder. And for sure, whenever somebody wants to talk to me about business, every now and then people are curious about starting a consulting business or entrepreneurship and how do you get started and what do you need to do? And I'm often, there's a lot of technical and business operations and things we can talk about. And I'm like, be prepared to be confronted by your biggest challenge, which is yourself
Yeah.
and your stories. Because when you are in this, in particular as a solopreneur, I that's all you're working with. That team of thoughts in your head is your team, and
Yeah.
it is the
Well
place of
said.
it's the place of possibility, and it is the place of potential, um, disruption or distraction or destruction even, depending. So just the mindfulness around story when you think of inward and artward. So even that layer, and like you said, whether artward is I'm painting, writing, I'm designing a strategy, I'm collaborating in community, it's this, what can I imagine and how do I go about making it real? The places as I think about human-centered strategy and the work that we do, part of what's really important to me about the work that I do, so I not only do collaborative work with teams, I coach leaders because part of my, like, what do I mean by human centered strategy is remembering that we are always also part of the work.
Mhm.
And so often in my industry, the work is like out there. We're
Mhm.
going to go help a team or we're going to lead a team or we're going to do community. It's an outward action. So whether it's because our story shapes us and the stories we hold shape um, how we show up, how we get in our way, but also the point that you make and I make in human-centered strategy is that we influence, and in my case, our whole ecosystem is human. So in that dynamic, right, where we have all these overlapping um, infinity loops with each other. It's we influence and we are influenced by
Mhm.
all of it.
Mhm.
And so taking that I just there's not to me, there's no other way to acknowledge that it's just how it works, right? It's how humaning works, is it is this interconnected um, piece of it. And so the intentionality around, as you said, honoring the going inward. And though, for me, one of the places like, when I think about then where in this do we sometimes get stuck, right? So if we're painting this inward, artward, flow, reflection, doing model, I don't know, I'd be interested in your take when I think about how do I get stuck in that? I can get stuck on either side of that and. I can get stuck focused on what's happening and I'm not doing the reflection on me, and I can get stuck in myself and not take action,
Mhm.
right? I can either just be pondering that idea safely forever, right?
Yeah.
As I did with this podcast for about 6 years, safely ponder where I don't have to be in the passageway yet. I just get to be in the lovely pontificating and the dreaminess of what it might be, but never feel the squeeze of the making.
Yes. Oh, what a perfect word for that too.
Um, so it's a very interesting, like, even just having I keep doing this with my hands, I think even having just that infinity symbol as a tool
Yes.
is is a helpful model as just a reminder as a check-in of how am I flowing through this? Like,
Absolutely.
where am I? I know in art and creativity, we talk about flow. I've never thought about it from an inward and artward flow. I think of it more on the artward side.
Yeah.
But I love now this idea that's emerging for me around flow that is across that. So I'll pass to you to see what comes up for you when you think about where there is stuckness, kind of where do you see people get stuck in the inward and artward? Because I think sometimes when we talk about the and, often we experience it as like a squeeze, or we can
Yes.
feel stuck in between them. And what you're painting for me actually is a very nice, like, um, not an equilibrium, but it's a nice kind of harmonious flow between the two that feels a lot more generative and easeful. Where does the stuckness come? Where do we get stuck in there, and how do you help people out of that?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it comes up for everything, whether it's art or anything else. I think it's when you make the choice to go into the tunnel before you get to the arena. And I think that's exactly, where it exists is when you're shifting and to go back to, the "and" statement I shared in the opening, this idea of anchoring and expansion. I think a lot of that stuckness comes from, a place where we have to make a choice and make a decision, because then that requires the movement from the ideation, the integration, the introspection, which, um, can also look a lot like divergence and just kind of like the floating in the possibility space, which can feel endless, into, well, how do we make this possible, right? And so if you're looking at, an infinity sign or the or the traditional ampersand, you have that X at the center of it, right? Where we're crossing over and we're taking something with us in that passageway, that thoroughfare. And that is the point where the fear or the resistance or the block or the obstacle likely comes up. Use the word squeeze. I'm sure a word that exists in both of our industries along with divergence is convergence and convergent thought. And that's where that happens, where it's how are you taking all of these ingredients that are floating them around and creating a recipe out of them, which requires, maybe sacrificing, an idea that you had or possibilities that you had, in order to make possible something else. And it exists on that same trajectory of as soon as you make a choice, which, yes, might sacrifice all of these other things, might challenge you to have to actually get into action and do the work, which is embarking upon the unknown and going to raise all of the flags, on alert. What you're also doing, and what I also like to remember that I'm doing, remind myself is only then will the possibilities of that choice reveal themselves. And so, in order to actualize anything, that iterative approach to choice and then what's possible within the choice, which goes back to divergence and to inquiry, which then you take back and you go through and through again. Um, I think another place that the and really shows up is in that fear, right? I think it's often viewed as a barrier to things, certainly within creativity. A lot of these pop psychology books on the creative process tell you how to work against it, but I have recognized it as a necessary and an even generative force. Rather than something to avoid, I feel like if we look at fear and what it's doing, it heightens our awareness, right? It strengthens our resilience. It it's the fuel for our courage, and so how we engage with it, I think, really shapes that evolutionary approach to the work that we're doing, where it's not just like this byproduct of creativity or whatever the endeavor is, but a necessary ingredient. Like I think all the other areas of ambiguity in the creative process, the light can only exist with the dark. And so I feel like it's, just as essential to use the word humaning, like to our humaning as it is, vital to the survival of creative work itself.
You said something there around fear and how we work with it. I mean, I even so I told you that my aunt today was fear and trust, and so I, have a tool that I've invented, I guess, that I call the fear suitcase,
Mhm.
where when I feel, because I think instinctually for me, historically, it's like away from fear, push away, and now when I feel it, I think of fear or maybe even as a part of me coming to me with a fear suitcase that I then say, "Okay, let's see what's in it." And so last night I actually like got out, watercolor paper, drew a suitcase and was like basically a check-in to go, what are all the stories that I'm telling myself right now? Like what is fear telling me right now about where I am? And so I'm like, draw the suitcase, and I'm like, all these things are popping out of it. And then it gives me an opportunity to make the story more conscious, and I can interrogate it differently to go, oh, is that like, oh, that actually might happen. Yep, you might. I'm afraid I'm going to feel grief about this. Yeah, you might. So how do we tend to that? I'm afraid this will happen. Will it really? What else is possible? And it just so
Yeah.
it like branched and branched and branched. And then there's several different sections where I ended up with a trail that just now says trust, trust, trust. And it
Mm.
helped me literally, not literally, but it helped me unpack fear. So y'all try that on, let me know if it works for you. But this idea of a fear suitcase lets me get curious. I'm a very visual person, so drawing it, writing it, mapping it helps me think through it. And so what that did not only was like let me use fear because there was some stuff that had energy, like the things that I was afraid. There's some things that I'm afraid. Um, and we could talk a whole podcast about risk, but I think of head risk and heart risk differently. The risk of I didn't try to make the thing real versus the risk of I'm going to look embarrassed or lose some money. And what regret, like which of those, if there's no risk-free aliveness, which of those do I want to sit with? So fear can help call me to what matters to me. Right? I'm afraid if I don't do this, right, I'm not stepping into my integrity, or I'm not right allowing this thing to be true, or is fear keeping me from something that is right off path? So there's just a lot of richness in there, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Is when, in my experience, when I really sit with it and unpack it, it allows me to fact check some stuff, right? Some of it is discarded to go, that's not my truth. Like, I don't know where that voice is coming from, but I don't feel that way. It's a really interesting, um, both fuel to use your language. It helps me with the fuel side. It also helps me with the story side. So back to like, what stories am I telling myself? That type of curiosity and that type of exercise has been really helpful for me. So I offer to you all the fear suitcase and unpacking for what it's worth as a tool
I
for
think
all
it's
of this.
brilliant. It reminds me a little bit of, um, the Simon Sinek approach to just asking why
Yeah.
over and over and to
Yep.
get into those layers, and there is so much unpacking that is required to, understand that, like, when, mm, self-sabotage might come up or the inner critic that might come up, it's hardly ever that top surface thing that's actually occurring. You have to go a few layers underneath. And then I think when we have that information to work with, we can insert the "and" into all of that, right? Like, when we understand, where perfectionism is coming from, we can shift that story and our relationship to it because so much like what you're saying, you brought up the messy middle earlier, is energetic. And I think the thing that we're often in the middle of that's getting in our way is our own mind. And when we can even just reframe a little bit, then we're loosening that energetic stuckness and that chokehold that's preventing us from taking the next small step or doing the next right thing. Like, for instance, with perfectionism, like, what's the story that we're saying and what's the story that's available to us? And if we are, a recovering perfectionist, or what does Brene Brown say about that? Something to that.
I
And an
definitely use that
aspiring, like,
language, I
good
don't know.
enoughist, I think
Yeah.
she says.
Nice.
Then, like, what are some of the superpowers that we already have at our disposal? Like, what do we already have that we can work with that's
Yeah.
here?
I think of, like, what else is true,
Yeah,
when I
like,
get a
we're
message, I'm like, "What
fastidious, we're
else?"
detail oriented,
Yeah, what else is
like,
true?
we know how to write, like, a damn good email, like, whatever it
Yeah.
might be,
Right.
it's like, let's take that and then loosen the ironclad grasp on, like, the rest of it, and take what's in existence and see what else we can kind of marry with that, rather than just, again, starting with the proverbial blank page in any of it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the "and" just as a tool, like you said, is help just to continue to expand the story. There's always more than one story that is
yeah,
possible, right?
right.
There's like, "Here's what's coming up for me about this, but what else is true?" If you're up for it, I think I wanna go back when you were describing inward and outward, another thing that you were talking about that really stood out to me, Erin, was around choice
Mhm.
in the creative process. Um, I mean, you know that I've, close up had to face this one recently. In my work, I think of you say, convert divergence and convergence. I use focus and flare.
Yeah, we've talked about that, I love
Yeah,
this.
on the design side. Um, but that so often whatever we're doing does, we have lots of different ideas. So in my case, it might be lots of things we could do as an organization, as a community to try to solve a problem that is in front of us or to step into opportunity. And we likely can't do it all. So prioritization is kind of the language that would come up in my space is how do we prioritize? How do we get back to focus? Is we can't do everything at once. As you were describing that, right, that making choice, I wanna make sure I heard it. Yeah, I think you were talking about making a choice or getting to focus is where we have to get so that we can realize the possibility of potential, and I feel like an "and" we are always holding, and I I talked about this a lot in the class with a group I know, but the letting go of all the other possibilities, right? The side effect of choice often to me is a grief, a letting go of all the things you're not gonna make because you're decided to paint this, the books you're not gonna write now because you're gonna write this. Um,
Well, let
I
me
don't know.
challenge you really quickly, Heather.
Yes, please.
I absolutely, resonate with grief as part of, but what would be the "and" on the other side of that for you?
The other side of grief?
Yeah, like, in making a choice, the side
Oh.
effects or the fringe benefits, or however you wanna look at it, are grief and.
Oh, I mean, there's so much that is lives alongside of grief. I mean, to your point, I mean, there's possibility. I think it's growth and grief, right? The choice to me,
I
though,
love it.
is always some combination, and I guess is what I'm saying is just to honor the "and" of possibility,
Mhm.
because I think sometimes we could think of it as like, "Oh, we have to make a choice so that we can do possibility." I'm like, and also for the feelers in the back, I just wanna go, and I feel simultaneously, like, thrilled and excited and sad or grief because the choosing is possibility and it also is a letting go. It's a not now. And I struggle with this. I think as somebody who might just have a little bit of fear of regret of the things undone, that choices can feel very heavy sometimes. Um, Again, I have a trust rock today
I
as a
love it.
as a reminder. Yeah, I just wanna bring that into it as you were talking about choice. Per usual, I think grief
Yeah,
just rose up in me to be like, "Don't forget we're part of it too." So as we're going inward and outward, and that's our session about the "and" is just honoring all that is there with us
yes,
and cue inward what might need tending
absolutely.
and
I
honoring in
think
that process.
I think a few things are coming up for me. Um The first is an exercise I often do at the beginning of like any multi-week class that I think we did in the facilitator training, which is where you draw a circle or a yin yang on a page. And on one side, you write down all of these things about this journey or this choice that you've made to commit to your
Mhm.
endeavor, in these cases, creative classes, creative projects. And you write down what you're apprehensive about, what's making you feel anxious, what you're grieving, what you feel like is lingering in kind of a heavier way. On the other side, you write what you're excited about, what you're looking forward to, what you're proud of in yourself and to yourself for having making made this choice to pursue this choice. Um, and I like to do that to first kind of get it all black and down in black and white because I think that helps lessen some of the languageness, like barrierless energy around something that can feel so expansive and overwhelming, such as grief, such as anxiety, right? When we name it. And, if you were to bring in the suitcase to that, like, and we had more time for an exercise like that, we would then go deeper and deeper and deeper into where that's coming from. But I also like the visual representation in just acknowledging that all of these things can be true. It's not that we're trying to take the things on the left side of the diagram and get rid of them, but rather honor that they're there, acknowledge that they're there, give them their due, and then remind ourselves that in a choice, we get to make also the choice of where we are spending our energy, which again is where a lot of this conflict comes up, right? Being in the middle of our own energetic mind and the ways that it's either holding us back or letting us move forward. And I think when it comes to a creative endeavor of any kind, you know, there's um, there's really one question that you can ask in that pursuit of moving forward, which is this in service to my creative journey? And if it's not, how can I work with that to move through it? I'm thinking again of the tunnel to the arena. I feel like that's such a powerful image that you brought up. Um, in Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, who does a whole lot of kind of Zen meditation, has a Zen, teacher and everything like that. She talks about this story that her Zen teacher shared with her about one of his students who was making a choice to move to Los Angeles. And it was this big life shift. Any of us who have made any sort of
Mhm.
encountered any fork in the road, like all of that frenetic energy of
Yep.
like, like
All the question spirals.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what the student was saying to the teacher was, "I'm gonna go, and if I go, I could always come back if it doesn't work out. Like, there's always back home." And, like, he found a lot of relief in that. And the Zen teacher kind of gave him the proverbial bop on the head, being like, "No, if you do that, you're never gonna be fully present in the choice that you're making. You're gonna exist in 2 worlds." And I think that's part of this kind of choice making is how can we make this commitment? And to me, the only way I've ever been able to make my way through any of that is to bring them down into micro commitments and to small steps, knowing that even if I see like where the arena is, like this light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, my journey there is never going to be linear. It's never going to be the way that I imagine it at the beginning, right? Like somebody's going to come down through the hall of the tunnel and I might trip or I might use whatever it might be, like I like the imagery of like a forest too,
Yep.
as
Yep.
well. Like
That
I can
that feels
only
more
do
accurate.
yeah, I think that they should just start putting forests like before you get to the sports arena.
Right.
Um just for the sake of this podcast and our metaphor.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that you can only ever take what the next right step is while hanging on to the idea of where it is that you're headed. But how you get there is constantly changing. And so I think the short answer to your question is everything just requires that small step, that sense of trust, that honoring what's there and asking the question, is this in service to my creativity? Or like thought goes, energy flows.
And I look at that question I'm like, is this so I'm thinking about stuckness. Like, is this in service to my creativity? And what if the answer is I don't know?
What do you think?
I don't know. I think you sit with I don't know. Right, let me lean into that. So let me try it on for real. Um, so if I'm at a stuck spot and because for me, your question is this in service to my creativity? I often think about living a life of authenticity. So I might say, what is the choice most in service to my authenticity? Um, and then if what comes up for me is I don't know, because it's an interesting thing that I'm even saying that because also I would say so often for me, what's true is that I try to figure knowing out in my head. And in reality, authenticity comes from doing something.
Mhm.
Um, so I would say doing something is aligned with my authenticity. So just do something.
Yeah, and I think maybe what I would say is, like, maybe the choice feels too big. Like, how can it
Mm.
be whittled down to something even smaller? Um, or identifying sometimes I feel like it's easier to actually identify what's not working or what feels like the wrong choice to help a little move a little bit more into alignment with what could be.
Something else too, as now that I'm sitting right, in real time, sitting with my own thoughts and stories, I think what I just heard myself say was I said do something and that's aligned with my authenticity, but also like permission to not know.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
it's sit down, have a seat in the forest for a minute and
Mhm.
trust that when you need to know, because I do think I can get in a place, I don't think it's unique to me, where I feel like I'm forcing a decision. Like I'm just energetically, I'm tired of holding the tension, so I just wanna make a decision to make a decision, and then there's some relief on the other side, but I think there is something that happens in that squeeze of not knowing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know how we work with that or what that points us to, but it's almost like, okay, that just means you're in the middle. Maybe that means I'm at the crossroads and the infinity sign. Um,
Yeah,
but
I
maybe just
wonder.
some grace to the I don't know. I mean, sometimes we have to make there are time pressures where we have to make decisions. Um, and sometimes there aren't. So it's just not to get too I'll probably
No,
take us down
I
a
love
rabbit
it.
hole, but
I love it because I think on the other side of "I don't know," when that's true and when that's what exists, and that's the kind of ingredients, to play with that metaphor again, that we're given, is, an invitation for experimentation, is an invitation for play, is an invitation to kind of sift through and kind of have this coexistence between the focus and the flare and kind of see what emerges, in this way that, I think emulates anything that we create and bring into the world, which requires, like, constantly revisiting and, revising and iterating, and seeing how we can kind of shape and chisel, till we get to kind of where we wanna launch it out into the world, share it with others.
I love that, and I think what's it reminds me too is so often when we're deciding what we wanna make, what we wanna do in our business, a choice feels like, "Oh, now I'm deciding this is what I'm forever gonna do." Even the language, I have found some relief in, not just what am I gonna do, but what am I gonna try?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is" so back to what am I committing to? I'm committing to trying this for 3 months. It does give it that a little more playfulness or grace, I think on the strategy side, this is we don't none of us know exactly what's gonna work from a strategy perspective or creativity, we don't really know if we're gonna love being a writer or not till we do it, but how do we try? What do we
Yes.
wanna test? Certainly, there are, um, lower and higher risk context for the trying that takes some consideration. Um, but yeah, how can a yes feel smaller? I
Mm,
guess is part of what
more accessible.
you're saying
Mhm.
is there a way to make it smaller? So yeah, and I don't know, I guess for me just to zoom back out is there's some permission to not know and a curiosity around is there a way to make trying more accessible?
And I think
And whether that
there's
is.
even a level of in order to know, we have to not know for a good portion of the journey. And how do we coexist within that ambiguity?
All right, let me slow that down. In order to know, will you say it again?
Oh gosh, in
In
order to
order to
know,
know.
we have to coexist with not knowing, I think.
So it's almost like because I can find myself in a spiral of like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. So what I hear you saying is like, great, that's part of getting to knowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
Yeah.
welcome it as a normal kind of sign of it. Erin, before we kind of start tying a bow on today, I'm curious in your work, you have such a unique role, I think, as a creator yourself, as a space holder for people facilitating creativity, as a business owner that like has a literal physical place for holding story and creativity. If there are any other kind of particular and tensions that really rise to the surface as a place where you see us kind of get stuck in our human experience, are there any kind of and tensions um, to highlight that also you might have a tip for us on how to navigate? Some component perhaps of the messy middle of things, I'm not sure.
Mm. The thing that's coming up, and I'll see if I can weave this into the and in some way, but in regard to the messy middle is and I think this is the thing that we encounter after kind of the limerence of the beginnings of a project. You know, where we feel like we have the energy, we feel like we have the momentum, we feel like have the fortitude because it's like so integrated within our energetic space that it's like just get out of my way. I want to actualize this. And then when we start making those choices and we realize, oh, this is going to take some hard work to get through,
Mhm.
that's often where you see kind of a lot of projects or ideas putter out. And I think this is where we as human beings start to bring a sense of shame and guilt into our experience that goes along with our creative endeavors. And so this is a big kind of ethos that I like to hold in whatever we do, which is that there's no such thing as having it all. I think there's never going to be a perfect ideal time to create in our lives. There's always going to be worries, there's always going to be doubts, fears, responsibilities, duties, relationship pressures, work pressure, every manner of life getting in the way. And so I think there's this idea of like, we are always creating in the middle of things. It is always the messy middle, wherever it is we might be with a particular project. And so I think in order to create in the middle of things, we have to hold the intention to create while we're also doing some reality testing. And maybe that's the
Mm.
like, and learn how to change our mindset and get a grip on our own thoughts. Like, again, like, if you decide, that you're saying that what you're saying does serve your creativity, you're not looking at the truth or the falsity of a thought, but rather whether or not the thought is serving you. Because I think there's countless true thoughts that don't serve us to hold on to as we're trying to move something through fruition.
Mm.
So, yeah, I think maybe that's what I would kind of come back to is this sense of reality testing, the sense that we're constantly in the middle of things and to figure out how we can work with our own stories to reframe them in a way for that sense of sustainability, for that sense of generativity.
I'm thinking about my clients right now. I mean, what stands out to me the most about what you just said is like we're constantly in the middle of things in life, in business, in organizations, in creativity. in strategy. I mean, I facilitate a lot of strategic planning, and part of the first piece is like, let's just can the process needs to acknowledge that we're not pulling out a clean sheet of paper to imagine the brand new things. There's a lot of context and things that exist already around us, and all of that reality has to be considered. So it definitely resonates that even if we talk about, sometimes we talk about in isolation, this idea of I'm going to create, I'm going to make something. So to just anchor, acknowledge it in the zoomed out messiness of our context, where a lot of things already exist. Some things are in a different phase of existing, that creating is existing in the context of complexity and messiness. How does that, I'm trying to think of how does that change how we would approach it for that to be true? How do we make differently if we honor that we're constantly in the middle of things?
The first thing that comes to mind is your phrase of focus and flare, and maybe repurposing a little bit for this conversation in this idea of what we focus on expands, and how those two things are not isolated from one another, but in a dynamic, integrated, intertwined, constant relationship. That's not just in the choice, but in our relationship to the choice. And I think, like a lot of this like comes back to the way that we are human and the way that we are developing our own sense of who we are. Um, and that requires a combination of awareness, of purpose and meaning, and then of actions and repetition, our time and energy. And I think you need all of those in order to kind of get into the mindset of working in service to what it is that you want to do.
So
I don't know if that
let's
answers your
well, I want
question.
to slow that down. So you said we need three things to work in service to what we want to do. What are the three things again?
I would
Awareness.
say I would put awareness and compassion as one, which might be like the quality of our experience. I would put purpose and meaning as another, which maybe we could relate to the goal. And then the third would be actions and repetition, right? How we're working with habits, and that I think is like our time and energy. Awareness, meaning, actions.
And I was going to ask you where of those in those three, as we think about being in service to what we care about, where do we get stuck? And I immediately thought of ways that I get stuck in all three of those.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's an interesting model,
and
and
I think
really to me brings it back to inward and outward. So when you awareness, purpose, and action, almost to me is when I think about that infinity diagram, it, inward is the awareness, outward is the action, and meaning is why are you even in the dance in the first place?
yeah, yeah,
So
I
it's
love
really a
that.
nice overlay to the model that you laid out
And
in the
then
beginning. It's like this intention and awareness and the action, and that they're always feeding each other back and forth.
yeah, and through the lens of praxis, the word that they use at that center point is integration. How these two things come into relationship with one another. And all of this is constantly shifting because of how dynamic it is. And I find that incredibly exciting.
So when I think of purpose and meaning, Erin, how does what is not to be meta, but like what does meaning mean in this? When you think of purpose and meaning from the creative side, because I think of purpose a lot. We're often working with folks who are trying to create systems that better support human flourishing. Like purpose is such a key driver in right our missions and our visions and our work. What does purpose and mean? How does purpose and meaning show up from a how do y'all talk about, or how do creatives talk about purpose and meaning, or how do you talk about purpose and meaning in a creative context?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the meaning is the more personal or emotional significance that has to do with it, and when you look at it like meaning from a place of scholarship, separate from creativity, but in general, from like a biological standpoint, why we as humans are driven to meaning. The three ingredients of that are purpose is kind of a subset of meaning, significance, how we make, and then coherence. So, it's like how all of these things come together to kind of form a whole. But I would say that meaning is more about this like personal emotional relationship that we have from the creative act. What does it reveal or reflect or contribute to my life, to my role as an artist? And then purpose feels like the intention to me, like maybe even a little bit more goal oriented to what's behind a creative act. Like, why am I creating this? Um, I don't know if that helps kind of tease them out. I mean, they're kissing cousins for sure.
What is your when I think of, you as a creative, again, writer, and you're creating business you're doing a lot of creating in a lot of different ways. Is your purpose when you think about that for you, does it feel like it's the same across your efforts, or does it seem to vary by project?
I would say the meaning is more consistent than the
Okay.
purpose. Yeah. And for me, I'm an existentialist. And, all I mean by that is like meaning is what we make of it.
Yeah.
And in that sense, we have this fierce responsibility to make something of it. And I kind of take that quite literally in in my life and try and go and make things. um, but I think what that affords me is to bypass some of like the linearity and the language that can get in the way of trying to have a more ephemeral experience to and with the
Hmm.
self and with each other. And so then if I'm inserting that into a specific work and I'm looking at the purpose of that work, like a poem, usually that's in pursuit of a big question that I have, like this thematic um, ghost that like won't stop haunting me. And I have a lot, like my ghosts are the same ghosts that I've had forever. And
Yeah.
they iterate, like they're getting quite
They morph a
smart.
little.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they're trying to outsmart me and they do a pretty good job of it. Um, but it's just becoming, deeper and deeper in relationship with these questions of, why are we here and what are we doing and how are we being intentional and meaningful with that time? Which
Lo Oh, sorry.
goes by like that. That's it. Yeah, that's it.
I love the language of fierce response. I think fierce responsibility and in the context of meaning making. You say you feel a fierce responsibility to make meaning
Yes.
of
Yeah.
life, of
Mhm.
meaning, just to make meaning, to make this meaningful. I connect. I don't even fully. It's like my body is connecting with what you said before my brain is caught up with what you said. But this fierce, I think I share that. I don't know if I would have thought about it as responsibility, but that resonates with me. A fierce responsibility to make meaning.
Right, because then if we're gonna throw the ampersand into this, for me, I think one of my big existential fears that propels me forward in almost everything is this concern that this is all just meaningless.
Mm,
And in the existential lens, right, I'm not trying to be nihilistic, but I can teeter on the edge
sure.
if I'm not careful. And
Yeah.
that's where that sense of responsibility comes in, is how am I in relationship to, well, if all of this is meaningless, then I get to choose what's meaningful, right? And that opens up a whole can of worms of how we then come
Yeah,
to
sure.
coexist within like all of these institutions and expectations and
Right.
norms and, on and on. But,
It's
I
a
think
liberating way. I don't know, something about that feels really igniting to me,
yeah,
though.
Yeah, me too. Most of the time. Sometimes it's, like,
T or
paralyzing.
slash terrifying, right,
Yeah.
paralyzing or terrifying, back to the heaviness of choices of like, "Oh, I'm gonna make meeting,
Yes.
and now my
Yes.
choices are everything, and what if I pick the wrong ones?"
And what a great way to kind of, like, put a bow on this is, like,
Yeah,
both of these things are true. Where am I focusing my time and my energy? That's what I have to give in this life. I have my time and my energy. Where am I choosing to put it?
I think that's a great question to leave everybody with. I have my time and, my energy. Where am I choosing to put it on this infinity symbol dance we're on, inward and artward and outward, integrated in the center, connected. Speaking of where you put your time and your energy, where should folks go if they want to learn more about what you're up to or writing, about Story Parlor? We can certainly put the links and all the things in the show notes, but if there's anything before we go that you want to call particular attention to, I want to make sure I give you space to do that.
Sure. Well, folks who are in the western, northern North Carolina region, come out to Story Parlor. We're located in West Asheville. And our website is www.storyparloravl.com. And then you can use that same Story Parlor AVL for our Instagram handle, where we're constantly sharing like the most up to date things that we have going on. We have classes every night of the week. And then over the weekend, we have events that celebrate storytelling through all art forms. So there's music, theater, dance, performance, prose, poetry, you name it, often more multidisciplinary nature as well. Um, and then for folks here, but then also beyond, the Inward and Artward School of Creativity kind of takes this ethos and philosophy of Story Parlor and brings it online for anyone who wants to explore that relationship with how our inner experience can be worked with, examined, repurposed for creative bounty, and however that ends up being manifest. And the website for that is and Artward, ARTWARD.com. And same for our social media handles for that, at Inward and Artward. Um, I don't have a personal website or personal social media really, uh, but I think I'm on the internet and accessible if people
You
want to
can
get in
find
touch.
me.
Yeah. If you
You
really
can
want to find me, you will.
find me at all of the places.
Uh-huh.
Come, buy
I'm
a
I'm
book,
probably at Story Parlor if you really wanna find
probably
me.
at Store
Just come
Parlor,
on by. Yeah.
which is, just such again, such a delightful, cozy, right, tiny little intimate space, for gathering and that people can share. I mean, you all do open mic nights if people wanna read. So
Yeah.
it's not as if, like, you have to be art fancy in some way to be
No,
connected.
we challenge that, pretty fervently in that we have a strong belief that we're all creative, we all have a story to tell, and that
Mm.
we're hopefully providing a platform where people feel that sense of welcoming and belonging, encouraged to do so. And because you brought up the open mic, a big thing that I'm working on with our program manager, Lion, is really adding to what we call our Sunday sessions. And so on Sundays at Story Parlor, pretty much at any point during the day, you can just pop in. You don't need to have a reservation. In the mornings, we have kind of like these morning muse type sessions, like creativity and coffee, or parallel play if you want to just come and work on something, get in community. And then kind of taking into the evening, where we have the All Arts open mic, which is free and open to the public, and you just share a 5-minute work in progress. We have creativity salons, creativity mixers, lots of different things that all of Sunday is designed to be really accessible and like a great entry point into how we are hopefully kind of creating a community through Story Parlor as a whole. Um, and everything is either free or low cost or pay what you can or donation based as well. So we're keeping the accessibility front of mind for those sessions then too. But
Love
that's
it.
all on the website.
Love it. And we'll link to it. Again, I just, I wish you all the best with what you're making that goes so much beyond making in a way that we traditionally think about making. right? Like the craft of creating nurturing and supportive space for people to be and belong and connect as they are is such a special kind of creativity that I don't think we usually register as creativity. So, just for others out there facilitating, creating culture within your organizations, like I think we've reserved creativity for painting and writing things. And I've just like, I watch the way that you create, and it just is such an expanded way of thinking about making, and is so generous that it feels inspiring to me to think about living creatively and holding space for each other in a way that honor like that feels like a creative process. It just feels expansive, in a way that I'm excited to just watch and, touch in and be part of, but I think there's just a lot to learn, from how you're going about this. So I appreciate so much you taking the time to come talk to us today. I look forward to continuing to stay connected in some way, um, to Story Parlor and all that y'all are up to over there. To everybody else, thanks for hanging in. I know that we took some journeys here, existential and otherwise, but
Through
appreciate
woods and tunnels and
through
arenas.
woods and tunnels and ampersands and infinity loops. Um, just appreciate. I think at the heart of this podcast, Erin, for me, as we navigate the and is curiosity.
Mhm.
So I just send big love to the audience today, listening in and holding this conversation with curiosity. And I would just an invitation around, yeah, what are you making? Keep making, inward and artfully. Aaron would challenge us maybe to say it's our fierce responsibility, to make things. We're going to keep trying to make podcast episodes. This is my current creative focus, which has taken
Yay.
some time to get to focus around. Um, Please subscribe and follow so you can get current episodes and share it with somebody that you think might like it too. And we look forward to seeing y'all next time. Thanks. The Stand in the And podcast is supported by Human Centered Strategy, where we help leaders and teams build connection and strategy and complexity so that everyone can flourish. To learn more or to work with us, please visit us online at humancenteredstrategy.com or message me on LinkedIn.